Welcome to Grit with Wisdom. This is the podcast that delves deep into the inner psyche of mountain bikers from all aspects of our sport in order to discover the tools and the tactics that can help us have more fun out on the trails more often. Our aim here is to help you understand what it takes to push our own personal boundaries in the sport we love from a mental and emotional perspective. Today on the show, I'm sitting down here with Squamish local Blake Rowsell. Blake is an educator, a travel enthusiast, a sports lover, and he has a burning passion for mountain biking. He started out teaching high school and then jumped at the opportunity to work with the 𝗳𝗽𝗆𝗆 Community back in 2010 for the Winter Games. This inspired him to pursue a master's program in which he investigated mountain bike tourism here in BC. Since then, he's worked in many aspects of the outdoor industry, from running his own sports business to these days teaching outdoor recreation programs at Capilano University. So I'm super excited to sit here today and to be unpacking Blake's research and the intersection of mountain biking, mindset, and education. Blake, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jake. And thank you for making my commute to the city much more enjoyable. I've been digging deep into the podcast for the last few months, and it's been really good fodder for my brain and thinking about how to get the most out of my personal mountain biking.
I'm stoked to hear that, man. It's been cool chatting already. Today we had a nice kind of wet and wild ride down 𝗬𝗃𝗃𝗵 here in Squamish. And been touching on so many topics that I'm excited to reference about in today's conversation. Before we get into that, I want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything there I missed in your intro? I know you've done lots of different things over the years. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think you got it. Your Google skills are on point.
Fantastic, dude. It's something I'm well practiced in. Awesome. Well, why don't we start with a big open-ended question? I want to ask you, what's your why when it comes to mountain biking?
Yeah, I've been reflecting about this a lot over the last few weeks since we talked about doing this. And, for me, mountain biking is the only sport that isn't attached to any form of revenue generation for me, any income. So that allows it to have a really special place. Like, I arguably love skiing more than biking, but I work now as a ski guide, and that kind of muddies the waters a little bit in terms of really pursuing a personal passion and getting the most out of it just for me. So, I love biking because it's my place to go and, get away from everything else. I'm a pretty busy guy. I have 3 jobs and 2 kids. And to get that kind of quiet time to really unpack and process a lot that's going on in my mind, biking provides that space for me. And that's really important to being a successful parent and teacher, educator, whatever you want to call it.
Totally, dude. Yeah, it's such a great answer. I'd love to hear a little bit about where you grew up and when bikes first came into your life.
Yeah. So I grew up in Ontario, outside Toronto, and it's pretty darn flat. So I have this memory, age 14, getting into mountain biking. My father was a triathlete, and in the 90s, he started adding mountain biking into his kind of training routine. So he'd go out with his training partners and they'd ride their rigid bikes around. And, he said to me, let's get some bikes and let's go for a pedal. And I remember entering my first cross-country race and absolutely getting destroyed because I hadn't done any training and I wasn't really particularly good on the bike. And at the time, I was dreaming of downhill racing.
Right.
Because I felt like, that kind of cross-country riding wasn't really what I liked, but it was the only thing that was possible. Now, everyone that I talked to about downhill biking at this time was having catastrophic crashes, trying to bomb down hills in their Lycra with their fully rigid bike. So I never ended up getting into downhill biking. And in fact, I kind of lost the passion for biking in my teenage years. And then I moved to BC in 2000, and that really kind of invigorated my passion for biking. I understood the sport and I'd done it, but it wasn't until I moved to Vancouver that I was truly, my eyes were open to what biking was. And at that time, we started to see a real improvement in the bike technology. So it became more fun to ride a bike. Yeah. I remember showing up with my first full suspension bike and starting to ride trails and understanding what shuttling was, and my mind was completely blown. And then I ended up back in Ontario for a little bit teaching high school, and again, I kind of gave up on the biking a little bit. And then when I moved back to BC in 2010, like full time, that was when it was like game on, and I was riding like 200 days a year and like changing my life around biking.
Yeah, fantastic. I love hearing that backstory. It sounds like the bike technology took a little while to catch up to your dreams of riding downhill, but
I think
wrecking yourself on every ride.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, fantastic, dude. And it sounds like that love hasn't faded at all. You're still out there kind of 6 days a week you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to dive straight in here to the mindset stuff. There's so many topics we touched on earlier. But I'd love to talk on that topic about some strategies you have for avoiding distraction and getting the most out of your rides.
Nice. Yeah. So a little bit of background first. I, like many athletes, struggle with ADHD. And I find it really hard during my workday to focus in on any activities. And it wasn't until I really found biking that I was able to harness my personal power, motivation, energy, and like really organize my day. And I find when I'm working in the office or, trying to sit in front of the computer and I start getting antsy, I know that's time. Pause, stop doing what you're doing, go for a ride, and then come back and have that reset. So for me, what I find is when I'm riding, I'm so hyper focused on that one single activity that my brain has the time to unpack all of those other challenges in my life. And I come back, and usually maybe during the ride or as the ride's ending, problems that I've been wrestling with just magically get solved in the back of my mind because my brain only has that one thing to focus on. And I'm super fortunate. I know lots of people want to say really nice things about their partner, but my partner, my wife, is so understanding of where I'm at and what I need that she helps me find the space to get on my bike a lot, 6-7 times a week on the bike, because she knows that when I come home, I'm a better husband, a better dad, and a better at my job or jobs.
Totally, yeah.
So we prioritize that in terms of like, when you're going riding today, how are you going to find that time and that space to reset and get yourself where you need to be?
Yeah, it's so cool that you have that amount of self-awareness that you're like, I'm getting to this point, I need to go for a ride. I know quite often I'm like, I can't just leave work and ride for 2 hours. That would be unproductive. But it sounds like you're almost more productive because of those couple of hours you
Absolutely.
take to go ride in the middle of the day.
Yeah, like, many of us focus with some kind of attention problem, and you end up trying to do 10 things at once and doing none of them particularly well.
Yeah.
So, slamming on the brakes and saying this isn't working, I'm going to go and, whatever you need to reset. For me, it happens to be biking is the way to do that. And then come back and be able to then focus on the things that need to happen. But also like having that time when you're riding to allow your brain to prioritize, like, what do I actually need to do when I'm done this ride?
Yes. It's a great way of getting ourselves grounded, isn't it? And
right.
Thinking about, okay, what's actually important here? Perhaps maybe we're getting wrapped up in work tasks that are just keeping us busy but aren't actually that important.
I watch myself and, like I'll walk through the house and I'm like trying to go to the office to start working. And on the way there, I see something and I'm like, I got to fix that before I get to the office, and then that thing. And then an hour later, I haven't even made it to the office yet. Those are the kind of indicators to me that, I need to go and hit that reset button.
Yeah, welcome to my life. I can relate so much. It's the modern work from home life, isn't it? It's
That's
just
right.
like never actually getting to the office.
Yep.
And it's so counterintuitive that what you actually need is to go out for a ride at that point rather than walk straight to the office or struggle your way there.
Now, with that said, like, I've learned some things that help me get the most out of my ride, because it's not just being on the bike necessarily that allows that reset to happen. There's a couple things that I've learned that really work for me. And the first thing is that I usually ride alone. And I don't love riding alone. I had way more fun riding with you today than when I go out for a ride on my own. But when you're riding with somebody else, you're chatting. You're not really getting into that, and you've talked about it a bunch of times, is that flow state where you're so fully engaged in what you're doing that your mind has that ability to work through those problems and unpack and kind of organize itself. So maybe we should pause for a second and talk about flow state, and then we'll come back to the strategies that I use to get in there.
I'd love to, because I know everyone has maybe a slightly different explanation of what the flow state means for them.
That's right.
So I'd love to hear your version.
Yeah, so when I was doing my master's research on mountain biking, and this would be like early 2010s, I learned about this guy in the 70s, and everyone says his name quite differently, but the way that I pronounce it is 𝗦𝗾𝗃𝗃𝗵𝗃. So I encourage everyone to like Google this, because he's the original creator of the flow state, the concept. And he actually found it in musicians, that they start doing their craft, their activity, and they become so engaged in it that everything else just like melts away. And hours could pass and they don't even like follow the time, because they're just so engaged in that activity. And then as he started to research it, he found like there's other places that this was happening. You know, if people were in the right workspace, and then it translated into sport also. And the idea is that there's this like graph, and on the graph there's challenge and ability level. And when the thing that you're doing is perfectly matched to your ability level, there's no anxiety, but there's the right amount of challenge. So it's challenging enough. And the great thing about this flow state is that everyone has a different kind of thing that helps them get into the flow. So a new rider could be on a green trail and totally engaged, 100% engrossed in it. Whereas you and myself might be a bit bored on the green trail because we're not in that challenge zone. So I think about that Top Gun movie where it's like the danger zone, and I sing that song in my head sometimes, but like the challenge zone is like the spot that you want to be in to perfectly get into the flow state. And, you know, when I learned about this, it was just such like a pivotal moment in my life. I was like, I want to be in this place as much as possible.
Yes.
And when I introduced it to my university students that I'm teaching, my goal for them is to find something in their life that allows them to get into the flow state. It doesn't matter what that activity is, right? Whether it's music or whatever. But I just feel like it's such a gift to be able to get into a space and time where you are so hyper-focused on that one individual activity that nothing else matters. And, you know, you had a guest, Greg McDonald, a few weeks ago that talked about, you know, forgetting about bills and, you know, your mortgage payments and et cetera, et cetera. And that's the time when my brain really has the capacity to focus in on those problems that it can't solve otherwise.
Totally. Yeah, it's almost like we get rid of all the noise and can focus in on what's important.
That's right.
Yeah, I love that explanation. Thank you for diving in there. And I'm curious, like, what do you think it is about mountain biking that makes it your thing to get into the flow state?
So over the years, I've been really into a lot of activities. I mentioned skiing already, surfing, kite surfing. Those things have all been like passions of mine, but they're all very weather dependent. And the thing that I really love about biking is almost any time I can go out and have a great ride. You know, as we're sitting here, it's absolutely pouring rain. It was pouring rain today. We still had a great ride.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it was a bit hard to get motivated to go for that ride, but we had a great time.
We helped each other. Yep.
That's the thing about biking is I don't have to watch the weather. I don't have to be standing in the lift line at 7 a.m. to make sure I'm going to get those 5 pow turns. I'm not fighting with people in the lift line. None of that stuff. I just, whenever I'm ready, I get on my bike and I just start pedaling, and it's always awesome. So I think that's the reason why biking has become that activity for me. And, you know, I tell my students, I stand up in front of some of my classes and I'm like, okay, I want you to know that I'm a drug addict. And they're shocked. And I'm like, my drug of choice is dopamine or adrenaline.
Yep.
And the fact that I can get that fix, get that hit, but also get fitness and have the ability to enter into that flow state.
Yeah.
And there's no other activity that I've found for me that hits all of those targets. You know, like there's nothing in the world like having the sickest power turn on skis. Amazing. But it's so rare that that happens.
Totally. There's a lot of barriers in between us and getting that turn, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well,
But
external factors.
you can hop on the bike anytime and there's a berm to be railed, or, you know, a little drop to be had, or just like this tech Rudy section that you can blast through, like
Totally.
it's always there and available.
Yeah, especially living somewhere like this, Squamish or in BC, there's so little barriers to going mountain biking.
Yep.
So that opens up the potential to enter in that flow state more and more often.
That's right.
Yeah.
Once you've got through the initial cost of buying the bike, above and beyond that, it's just going out and pedaling.
Fantastic. And I know you've had lots of practices and kind of like intentionally trying to get into that flow state more often. You've got some pretty solid kind of do's and don'ts that work for you in terms of getting into the flow state. You mentioned one of them already, kind of like riding alone is a good one. What
Yeah.
are some of the other do's and don'ts that you're aware of?
Yeah, so the other one is the phone. So I try really hard before a ride to go through trail forks, plan my ride, and have like even like a plan A, B, and C for how things are going. Some days it'll be like wet and I'll be like, you know, I don't know if I really want to ride that rocky feature today. Maybe I'll do this trail, but maybe I'll get riding and see. But at least I have like a good ride plan in my head, so I'm not pulling my phone out every 5 seconds. Because I find that every time I pull my phone out, that kind of like hits a bit of a reset button in terms of entering into the flow state. It does take a bit of time to get there. So every time that I'm pulling my phone out, I'm distracted from what I'm doing. So I try to limit the amount of times that I'm pulling my phone out. Now, I'm a bit on the fence on this one because I do use a Garmin watch to track my rides, only for like personally seeing, you know,
Yeah, that's
how
a
much
good
I'm
tool.
getting out. Like, I'm not chasing KOMs or anything like that. That's not what it's for. But notifications show up on my watch. And I'm a bit confused about this one, how to deal with that in terms of staying in that flow state, because it is like a momentary distracted. Now, it happened today on our ride. Like, I had a bit of a parenting emergency, let's call it that, where I got a phone call and a text message, and it was like our ride got derailed a little bit because of that. Now, I'm not going to turn my phone off and say, I'm not going to be a parent for this 2 hours.
Totally.
That's not what's happening, but trying to limit that phone stuff and going in with a good ride plan. So as we were talking about today on our ride, like I just was on a bit of a road trip through BC, and I was riding in Kimberley and Revelstoke, and there are few of the rides that I had were what I would call like failed rides. And by that I mean the network is so spaghetti that I'm pulling my phone out every like minute to find out where I am on the ride. And regardless of how good the trails are, if I'm constantly having to like navigate and figure out, then I'm not having a good time. I'm not entering that flow state, and I'm not getting that relaxing experience where my mind and body can fully be engrossed in the activity.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I it's not something I've been conscious of before, but I know I've definitely had lots of good rides and lots of bad rides.
Yes.
And the ones where I'm pulling my phone at every intersection are often not the best rides.
That's right.
And not the ones that I remember, for sure.
But sometimes you do need to like, you know, learn the network and then go back the next day or a couple days later and then re-ride, or now that you know kind of where to go. So it might be this is an exploratory ride. I'm not going to get what I want out of it in terms of entering the flow state or any of that kind of stuff. But I'm going to learn the network, and then I know that I can go out next time and then get into that place.
Totally, yeah.
And then the other one about the phone is the music. So some days I don't want to ride. I really love riding, but I'm like, I just rode for 3 hours yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that, and the day before that. I've ridden every trail that's like right in my challenge zone 20 times already this month. How do I get the motivation to go to ride? So that's when I'll put in the AirPods and I'll like go and start pedaling. But the more that I do that, the more that I find that doesn't allow me to get that mental break that I need. It might get me out of the house. I might be getting the fitness, but I'm not getting, it's harder to get in the flow state, I think, with the music on, for me at least.
Yeah, I can relate. For me, like the flow state has a lot to do with being like completely present in nature.
That's right.
Listening to the sound of your tires on the dirt, listening to the sound of the birds, the rain, whatever it is.
Yes.
And music's great. But I'll find usually after half an hour or so, I'm like, okay, that's good with the music. It got me out of the house.
Yep.
But it's done its part now. It can go
That's
away.
right.
And
Yeah, and you know, I do quite like the way that biking is set up in Squamish, where you know you have a big pedal at the start, and then you're kind of at the top, and you can work your way down. You might have a couple like little elevators to go up on the way, but your main climb is at the start. You know, you have that hour pedal to get to where you want to be, pull those AirPods off, and then really get engrossed.
yeah, fantastic.
But I do find like the climbing is really the best spot for me to maybe not have that subconscious processing, but the conscious processing.
Yep. Yeah, I agree, because I feel like on the climb in, the terrain's not as demanding. So we can actually think about work or whatever problems we're dealing with
That's right.
and kind of work our way through them. And then usually by the time I've got to the top anyway, I'm feeling kind of at peace with that. I'm like, right, I've got a plan of action. I know what to do when I get home. Now I can laser focus in and focus on riding the
That's right.
technical terrain that demands it.
Agreed.
Yeah, fantastic. So like riding alone a lot for just having that space, kind of unwinding, using that as a tool. But I know you've got lots of good riding buddies as well. I always like to ask the question, when it comes to choosing a riding buddy,
Yep.
what are some kind of metrics you look for or things you look for in a person?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked this, because the ride that we met on was a ride that would normally be absolute torture for me. And the reason why I say that, and like this is not at all like a negative comment about anybody that was there, it was the slowest pace ride that I've been on in years. And like when we were riding quite fast and aggressively, but we had long waits in between rides, big like social ride.
Yeah, we were chilling.
Yeah, and like that's normally not what I like to do, particularly because of like the time constraints in my life. I think that day, like I was probably gone from the house for 5 hours.
Yeah.
And we rode, but we didn't ride that much, like not 5 hours.
We didn't ride for 5 hours.
That's right. But that was exactly what I needed that day. Now, in terms of like picking your riding partners, what I think is really important is the communication piece. Like, it would have been nice to have the conversation before with everyone that was going on the ride. Like, hey, we're going on a chill ride. We're bringing a dog. It's going to need lots of breaks. And going in with that headspace. Because for me, it's about entering into the ride with the right headspace. And this is for any activity, right? Like, I could be going skiing and it could be like, okay, I'm going with the mindset. I'm not going to talk to anybody. I'm going with my one ski partner and we're going to bang as many laps out as possible. And that's like, we agreed on that. Like, this is the purpose of the day.
Yeah.
So I think it's that conversation. And I don't think that mountain bikers are having that conversation pre-ride. And it ends up being like a bit of like you having to show off because you haven't communicated like, here's what our objectives are for that session.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, there's like this lack of alignment. And like, I thought I was coming out to get this, to
That's
get
right.
this feeling, or to ride this trail, or to do this thing.
Yeah.
And then sometimes our buddies got a completely different idea.
That's
And
right.
it's no one's fault, but we just haven't talked about it.
Yep.
Really interesting.
And it's like a super quick text message, right? Like, hey, what are we gonna ride? I'm kind of like tired today. Let's just have like a bit of a chill ride. Super easy one.
So no, with backcountry skiing, like that's something we're taught, isn't it? To like
Absolutely.
do that check-in, like how's everyone feeling today? Like,
Yep.
are you hungover? Are you tired? Are you on your A game? Are we gonna ride another shit? Like, what is it? But we don't just rock up and then there's like 15 people we don't know, like
That's right.
completely different set of circumstances. Yeah.
And I'll be honest, like sometimes it's super fun getting pushed to be like, let's have a hard charging day and let's like cat and mouse each other and like really go for it. That's great.
Yeah.
But I feel personally like a little bit of anxiety and almost fear when that isn't planned. Like all of a sudden you're just like, it's a bro down. Let's shred. And you're like, whoa, I didn't bring my knee pads, or like.
Totally. I find that quite often happens on shuttle days.
That's right.
You'll kind of show off and then often there's randoms to shuttle in with, and that's great.
Yep.
Sometimes it's like these people are charged and you're like, whoa, I didn't sign up for this today, but now I'm part of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like exactly. I had a massive group ride and we had a good plan, and then we got to the top of Cakewalk and there was two other like friends of friends that were there, and they were super hard chargers. They're like, hey, can we join you? And all of a sudden we were like absolutely ripping, and I was like, whoa, I thought we were like on a chill day today. So it's all about that, like that headspace, going in and having the plan, in the same way that like when I look at trail forks and I'm figuring out where I'm riding, I'm also like, I'm taking time to understand what features I'm going to see on the ride.
Totally.
So one of my like catch points, I guess, in the Squamish trails is the whale tail on end trails.
Yeah.
And like I've ridden it hundreds of times successfully, and I've had two kind of incidents. I had one early on, and then actually you pulled me into it and took me on some weird line, and I had a bit of an incident on it.
My apologies.
It's okay. It's all good. I should know better. But when I'm thinking about planning my ride, that gives my mind time to like process those features. So I don't like stopping at the top of things. I find that really ruins my flow. I like having the ability to process that ahead of time, knowing what I'm going in. Like, I can visualize that whaleback right now. I know exactly where my tires are going to go at each section, and that's in there. So if I know that we're going to go ride entrails today, that's in my brain.
Yeah, we're prepared for that.
Yeah. When I get there, I'm like, I don't even need to look at it. I know exactly where I'm going to go.
Totally makes sense. I mean, like, high levels of nervous system activation or anxiety is like direct enemy of getting into the flow state.
Yeah.
But at the same time, sometimes there's rides where we don't have that level of awareness. We don't know what's coming up, and perhaps we're going for a ride on a new trail. Or perhaps we do find ourselves in the unfortunate situation where it's like, I thought we were riding blues today and now we're on double blacks. I'm curious, do you have any techniques or tools or anything you use for yourself if you do find yourself feeling some anxiety on the trail and you're like, hey, this isn't what I signed up for, I haven't done that preparation. Like, what do you do in that circumstance?
Yeah, so I was listening to some of your older podcasts, and you were talking about like self-talk and motivational sayings to yourself, and I don't really do that, but what I try to do is compare the feature or the trail to something else that I know. And it's trying to create similarities in my brain. You've done this thing that is the same or even harder, therefore you can do this thing. And especially like with jumps, like jumping is not my thing. I've worked over the last few years to try to like gain some jumping skills, but I don't feel super comfortable in the air. So when I see a jump, I'm picturing it ahead of me and I'm like, okay, this is the same as this jump that you've done 50 times. So, your speed should be about the same. You can do this.
Yeah, fantastic.
So that's really what I look for is those symmetries.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of actually something you mentioned on our climb on the way up. You've got a really solid reflection process that you've built over years and years. You've built this habit of reflection. And I guess that's probably what helps you remember, like, hey, I've done all these things before. Can you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, so what we're talking about is that the Bachelor of Education program that I went through was a reflective teaching program. And it forced me at the end of every teaching block or teaching session to pause and think about, what went well, what didn't go well, what would you change if you did it the next time? And I think a lot of us fail to do any form of reflection about any part of our life. So like, thinking about our ride today, think about some of those harder features that we rode. The one that always gets me on Engram is that last kind of rock face thing.
Yeah.
And, I'm like fully gripped coming into it, even though it's like not a super hard feature, but I had a crash on it very early on, like one of the first times that I rode it. And I can't get that out of my mind. But every time that I ride, I think about, what line did you take? Today I took a little higher line at the start to see if that would set me up. And just pausing even for 5 seconds and being like, this is what I did this time. This is how it worked. Allows your brain to understand the next time that you go to do that thing, what did you do? Did it work? Did it not work? And like, it's been such a game changer for me to think about what did I do well and what would I improve next time?
Yeah.
Because many times I think in my previous life I did this, I'd be like, that was really shitty. I don't want to think about it. Push it off to the side. But that doesn't really help you grow.
Yeah, I find when I do that, when I get caught doing that, I end up in kind of this cycle where I have the same crash again and again and again on different features.
Yeah. I do find it a bit hard to reflect on those crashes to be like, what could I do better? But I think that would be an area of improvement for me is like when I have a crash to be like, okay, walk it back. Where was the error? So the next time I go into that feature or a similar feature, I'm coming in with a little more confidence.
Yeah.
And this is one of the themes that I've noticed, kind of throughout your podcast history is about rider confidence. And it's one thing that I 100% notice on the bike more than any other activity in my life is that it is such a confidence important thing. It is, if you are tentative going into something, you are not going to be successful.
Totally. And it goes back to like that nervous system activation
right.
or anxiety as well, right? Like if we've got high levels of anxiety about something, we're going to be naturally a little more tense.
Yep.
And if anyone's rode mountain bikes, they know that like being tense on the bike isn't always the best way to be, especially when we're challenged. So yeah, it's super interesting to hear you speak on that. Hello everyone, and thanks for listening. If you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to give it a like, give it a subscribe. And if you'd like to know more about my journey in mountain biking and my background as a mountain bike coach, check out episode number 29, where I dive a little bit deeper into that. Now let's get right back to the podcast.
So Jake, I got a question for you. You know, you've lived all over the world. You ended up here in Squamish. What are the things that you love about living in Squamish?
Yeah, man, I love this. Like we're saying on our right, I love when the podcast gets flipped and all of a sudden I have to put my thinking brain on. You know, yeah, it's like, it seems like such an obvious answer to me now that I've found myself here. It definitely wasn't an obvious answer 10 years ago when I was kind of like looking for my thing and my path in life. And I guess what really drew me to Squamish here is like diversity in everything. And I mean that in terms of we've got all these different environments and ecosystems all around us. And also along with that, it's easy to access all of these different environments. We can go for lunchtime rides and all of those wonderful things. And in trails as well. You know, I've coached in other places, I've ridden in different places all around the world, but it's hard to find a place like this where we have anything from, you know, green trails, flow trails, tech trails, rock slabs, jumps, gap jumps, steep tech, kind of like beautiful loamy soil. There's such a diversity in riding here as well. And I find that helps me quite often. I'll get to a point in one style of my riding where I'm like, hey, I'm really kind of pushing it here and that's great, but the risk is getting to a point that I'm not willing to push this any further right now. So then I'll kind of switch. And I was mentioning to you on our ride earlier, like at the start of this season, I was kind of, you know, feature bagging, for lack of a better word, kind of different drops, different jumps, different rock slabs, all of the gnarly stuff here in Squamish. But then that got to a point where I had so many sketchy moments that I was like, okay, Jake, time to dial it down a little bit here, go back to your skills. So for the rest of the season, it's more been like riding trails, yeah, like riding that challenge zone, that fun zone. And I'm trying to go fast. I'm trying to perfect my cornering technique. I'm trying to work on different areas of my riding. So I think the terrain here allows for that. And then like the last part of diversity for me here is like the diversity we have within the mountain biking community. It's not just like this bro culture of like 20 to 30-year-old dudes here. You know, there's families here, there's men, there's women, there's people from all around the world. We've got a First Nations race team here. It's diversity, and I think it brings the culture as just such a bright light, and it's a fun community to be part of.
Yes. So the reason that I ask you this question is the other thing that I've identified that really derails my ride or limits my ability to enter into that flow state or like, you know, get the ride vibe going is the crowded trails. You know, when I show up at the parking lot and I can't get a parking spot on a Saturday morning, I'm throwing out F-bombs and I'm, you know, getting really frustrated when I'm trying to ride and somebody's like going really slow and they're, you know, bunging up my ride. I get really frustrated. But this is one thing that I think is important for us to talk about is, you know, the value of those people. Because it is because of tourism that we can enjoy all the things that we enjoy here. If there wasn't that many tourists, there wouldn't be 3 breweries in town. There wouldn't be 2 ciders. You know, there wouldn't be these amazing restaurants.
There wouldn't be the funding for all of these amazing trails either.
That's exactly, yeah. Like Circle wouldn't be as big and powerful as it is. You know, I wouldn't be able to put my kids into 3 different bike programs and bike camps. None of these things would exist if we didn't have these tourists coming into the community. So one thing that I'm very conscious of is when I see those folks that are impeding my ride, I take a breath and in my mind I say thank you, because their presence here allows me to enjoy the things that I enjoy. And you know, we have so many trails in Squamish, a crazy amount, and they're only here because of the amount of riders that are here.
Totally.
You know, if I was the only one riding, there would only be the trails that I built.
Yes, exactly right.
There's so many amazing, passionate builders. There's so much funding and support through SORCA and through the town of Squamish. So, you know, I encourage all of the listeners to, when you're getting frustrated about how busy the trails are, instead of making bumper stickers that say Squamish sucks, don't go, instead say thank you, because you're enabling this whole system to work.
Totally, yeah, such words of wisdom there. And it's really interesting, kind of even just hearing like that process, like take a breath, you know, and turn that frustration into graciousness. Like, thank you for coming and visiting our town and helping make it great. Yeah, I love that. And I guess there's a multitude of ways to to go about dealing with that frustration. I know for myself, and it kind of goes back to your point earlier of like thinking about what the ride's going to be like beforehand. Quite often, like sometimes I'll go and ride really busy trails and I'll kind of prepare myself mentally. I'll be like, this is
That's
like,
right.
I might be coming up on some slow riders here. It's a really touristy trail, but like, that's okay.
Yep.
And then other days where you might like hike with our bike on our shoulders for 3 hours into the woods. And like, those are the days when you're like, okay, I'm going to get some peace and quiet here and have this trail to myself.
Yeah. And, you know, when I talk about ride planning, you know, as one of the ways that I use to, you know, really get the most out of my ride, part of that is thinking about the times that I'm riding. You know, like I am the person that I get up in the morning, have a sip of coffee, and then I'm like riding immediately because I know that I can get a non-crowded trail at that time. And if that's what I'm looking for, that's the experience that I'm looking for, I'm making those decisions. So, you know, when I go for a ride at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday, I need to mentally expect that it's going to be busy. Or I need to find trails that are off the kind of beaten path a little bit.
Totally. Yeah. I find too, like the most crowded area is always the parking lot too. Some people will show up and be like, oh man,
Yeah.
I'll start getting frustrated because I can't get a park or whatever. But quite often once I'm out on the trail, and I find this coaching too, we all kind of spread out because there is so many trails here. Another great part of Squamish. But kind of good segue here. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the studies you did in mountain bike tourism. I find this area fascinating, and I think as we move forward away from resource-based communities, there's more and more openings and more opportunities for people to become part of like mountain bike tourism and outdoor tourism as a whole. So I'd love to hear you speak a little bit on that and maybe tell us like, yeah, some other interesting stuff you learned along the way there.
Sure. So one of the things that I'm doing now is I'm on the board of directors for the Mountain Bike Tourism Association of British Columbia. And our job is to encourage people to come to BC to ride their bike. We're working on doing that now in a way that encourages them to go to some of the less busy areas and spread the tourism out across the province. But in terms of research, we did this really cool economic impact study. So we did the first one in the Sea to Sky corridor in 2006, and then we did another one in 2016, kind of the 10-year anniversary, to see how much it had changed. And you can look it up. It's on Mountain Bike Tourism Association of British Columbia website. But the big piece of that is that in 3 months in Squamish, there was about $12 million injected into the economy just for mountain biking, just in the summer.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And like, these are the kind of studies that we need to say there is value in mountain biking. We need to be supporting this. And what we're finding, you know, British Columbia was founded on resource extraction, whether it was mining, whether it was logging, and those things are starting to kind of fade away a little bit. We're starting to shift priorities a little bit in this province, and small communities need additional sources of income. And, you know, wouldn't it be great if that revenue came from mountain biking? Because what that would mean is that more bike trails would show up in this province. It's an absolute win. So I was just in Kimberley last week, and I was riding there, and they just got a bunch of funding to build a whole bunch of non-bike trails because their mine has closed down, and they're looking for ways to keep the community vibrant, alive, and people living there. Because what we see in a lot of these communities, they turn into complete ghost towns. The mine closes, everyone leaves town because there's no jobs. So to find new jobs, tourism is one source, and mountain bike tourism is an incredible way to bring money into the community. And if you think about it, if you have a $10,000 mountain bike, you probably have enough means to be able to spend some money in the community while you're there. And, you know, it's taken governments a little bit of time to learn that lesson, but we are now slowly getting to the point where people are more switched on, and they're seeing mountain bike tourism and cycle tourism as a way to revive communities. And the amazing spin-off of that is healthier communities. So it's like a double win. Number one, you're bringing money in the community. Number two, the people that live in the community are actually healthier because they're getting outside, using those trails, doing activity.
Yeah.
So it's a complete win.
Dude, it's fantastic to hear that research, and you're a pretty proactive guy. You're not just doing this research and, you know, reading it because it's interesting to you. You're out there teaching other people at Capilano University, and then you're also on the board at Circle as well, which we'll talk about in a second. But I'd love to hear a little bit about like some of the courses you're teaching and how you think they're kind of shaping the tourism industries of the future.
Sure. Can we take one step back though? Because there's one other piece of research that I did want to talk about.
Yeah, fantastic.
Now it is
about that first.
a little bit dated because this research happened in 2012, 2013. So the world's a little different now than it was. And I was actually up in the Yukon in Whitehorse talking to mountain bike tourists about why they would choose to go to the Yukon to go biking.
Right.
And this was what my master's research was about, is what are the destination attributes for the things on the ground that would encourage you to choose one destination over another? The answer was uniqueness. And there was some really amazing data that I got. And you know, this one guy says to me, everyone has good trails where they're from. Otherwise, they wouldn't become mountain bikers. If you wouldn't be passionate about mountain biking if you had awful trails then.
Yeah.
So it's not just good trails that draw people in. It's something special. We now, you know, might think it as like an Instagrammable thing. But those moments that you're like, this is something that I want to write home about. This is something so cool that I want to share it with my friends. And in the Yukon, there was this really cool trail. There was like, it was an old mining road. So you pedaled up this mining road for 4 hours. And it was just like this epic view. And you were getting like riding through the old mine buildings. And then they had built like 6K of amazing single track descent down.
Wow.
And it was just like, this is the coolest thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
And it's those kind of experiences, and it's actually an 𝗵𝗶𝗽𝗀 epic trail. But it's these kind of experiences that people are like, I want to talk about this. I want to go home and I want to tell my friends how rad this thing was. And that was what the people that I researched were looking for, is those unique experiences. And, you know, a lot of communities have them. You know, Whistler now has the Lord of the Squirrels Trail, which is, you know, pretty cool to be able to get into the Alpine on your bike. That's a pretty rare thing.
Yeah.
And I think in Squamish here, maybe we're famous for flow trails.
Yeah.
Because I know
Flow trails, slab trails, for
the
sure.
the slabs, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. When people come and they're like in Squamish and they're like, take me to the flow trails. And I'm like, oh, again, the flow trails. But, you know, it's, people always say to me, we don't have this many amazing flow trails where we're from.
That's true.
Now, you know, people are starting to get there. Like, everyone's building flow trails now. But the Half Nelson, Full Nelson thing, and now Mickey's Magic, really, I think, put Squamish on the map as a tourist destination. And I think the important piece about that is that they're very easy trails.
Yeah.
Accessible, right? Like, less people, I think, say they want to ride the slab trails because not everyone can ride the slab trails.
Totally. Well, quite often, like as a coach and tour operator, people come like wanting to ride the slabs, but then they'll see the slabs and it's like, okay, we'll go ride some flow stuff first.
Yeah.
Work on some skills, and maybe next year when you come back, we can ride the slabs. But yeah, there's that gap. They're not super accessible, right?
I had this interesting conversation. I was at Silver Star riding the bike park, and I'm going to the chairlift, and I'm chatting with this guy beside me, and you know, he tells me he's from Alberta, and every year, you know, dad and son go on a trip, and he's like, yeah, we were in Squamish last year. I rode in and out, and I came into like that section, and I had a crash, and I don't know what happened, but I woke up in the hospital, and I was in the hospital for 3 weeks, and I was like, that is a crazy story. And this is just before they had redone in and out, that bottom part, the rock armoring there.
Yeah.
Because of this injury. Like, he had to get like full on heli evacuated out. And this is somebody like, you know, he's an average biker riding bike parks, but coming in and riding that trail, it was just like way over his head.
Yeah.
And I do worry about this. Like, I don't want to say too many good things about Trailforks because I'm slightly disappointed about how they are monetizing user-generated data. That wasn't the deal. When Trailforks started, you know, I don't know if you did, but I definitely uploaded trails and shared my data with Trailforks, and then they turned around and are now selling that data. Not super happy about that, but it is still the best tool. And the thing that I really love about Trailforks is that the destination has the ability to hide trails. So there's tons of trails here in Squamish that are not on Trailforks. And it has the ability to funnel people into the trails that work for them. And a good destination can put really good notes in there that says things like, be careful of the straight line on in and out because there's a big dip at the bottom. And hopefully our tourists are going on Trailforks, doing their ride plan before they ride, and being aware of those features.
Totally, yeah. And that goes back to like, doing your due diligence before the ride.
That's right.
Set yourself up for success, potentially lower some anxiety and maybe more chance of getting into the flow state, having a good ride.
Yeah, like, I love when I am planning my ride in a destination I don't know, and it says like, stay left if you want the hard features, stay right on this trail for the mellower line.
Yeah.
And I'm like, cool, I can stay to the right line the first time, I can take a little peek at those features as I'm riding through, and then maybe the second time I ride that trail, I can get into some of that gnarlier stuff.
Totally.
And I think that's how destinations are really setting their guests up for success.
Yeah, and we see that in destinations that have expanded or built a lot of new trails specifically for tourism. I know I was out in Fernie a couple of summers ago. All of their trails on Trail Forks have really good descriptions, and
That's
it
right.
almost felt like I was riding trails I knew
Yeah.
after reading those descriptions. Yeah.
That's right. And like, if they are putting photos in there of each of the features,
Yeah.
you can get that mental preparation, and then, you almost know the trail. There's this really amazing quote from, one of the folks that I talked to on that initial research project. And he was talking about starting to trust the trail builder as you ride the trail. You might start and you're kind of riding tentatively on a new trail. And then as you get into it, you start to understand what the builder's doing and the type of trail he's building, and you start trusting him. And then you're like, okay, I trust this builder. Now I can kind of like let off the brakes a little bit and ride a little faster. I know I'm not going to come around the corner and there's going to be a weird like double jump that I didn't expect.
Yeah.
So that for me was like such a crucial part of like the research that I was doing, mostly for me as a rider. To, he was putting words to something that I had felt. And I think a lot of people that are probably listening and watching this can feel that. Like when you get into the trail and you're like, oh yeah, this is like exactly where I need to be, I'm totally comfortable. It's because you trust what that builder is doing.
Totally, yeah. We're kind of talking about this through the lens of jump trails, weren't we? Like some jump trails.
That's
and,
right.
Other areas of BC where you have to brake check every jump, and like they're all really inconsistent and like hard to ride. Whereas a lot of the time here, if you're in Squamish or at Whistler Bike Park, like the jumps just work as trail speed, and you can kind of relax a little bit knowing that if you've cleared the first one, you're going to clear the second one, the third one, and so on from there.
Yeah, like, Uppers Mickey Magic is like the best example of this, right? Like, get on that trail and you don't need to like adjust your speed for each of the jumps. You don't need to put a pedal stroke in. Trail speed is just trail speed.
Yeah.
And,
exactly.
That trail like allowed me to increase my confidence in jumping and then push that to slippery salmon and then like continue to develop. And I think this is so important as trails are being built, is that the builder is really trying to develop rider confidence. And I'm so happy in the shift that we're seeing in the mountain bike industry from like, we need the gnarliest trails to now like, we want people to have a good experience on the trails.
Totally.
And it, I feel like that old school mentality, and like, I get it. Biking was really hard back in the day. Like, it was enough that I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But now a lot of these builders are saying, I want people to have a super fun experience.
Totally.
And they're almost building trails to allow people to get into that flow state.
And it's about like that diversity again, isn't it?
That's
like,
right.
For sure, gnarly trails are awesome. Let's keep building more of those, but let's also have some building blocks so the newer riders that are just starting out, that haven't been riding their whole life, can work up and perhaps get there one day.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, like, if people haven't ridden Mickey's Magic here in Squamish, I encourage everyone to ride it, regardless of their ability level.
Definitely.
Like, it is such a great trail. I take my 5 and 7-year-old on it, and they love it. My wife rides it, on her own, and she doesn't love riding on her own. She's like, doesn't have the confidence to ride on her own. And I ride it, and I'm still like having fun. And when everyone can have fun, from a 5-year-old to, somebody in the mid-40s, I think it's amazing.
Yeah, that's when a trail really has impact. Like you say,
That's
you can
right.
go as fast as you want, slow as you want, choose your own challenge.
Yep.
Yeah, fantastic. And this kind of leads in, I wanted to talk a little bit here about the work you do with Circle. I know you're on the trail committee there. You're kind of, part of a lot of the big decisions that get made around here and all of the great trails we have. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm, very, very happy that I was asked to be a part of that. I had been a part of another trail network in a different town where we have a little bit of a vacation property there. And, to go through that experience and, bring some trails online, that was really special. But to work in a community that has such history, such passion, That was something that I feel really honored to have been asked to do that. And the projects that, Sorka is taking on are crazy. Like the list of things that are on Sorka's agenda for the next 5 years are just off the charts.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited about the fact that we have a full-time trail crew here in town, first of all, maintaining the trails, and so many passionate builders. Like I was part of a builder session in the spring where anyone who's built a trail in town came, drank some beer, talked about what's next and how to work together, and just the passion in the room. And it's so inspiring for me. I love working on trails, and I love taking my kids out and working on trails. And I think it's really important to show kids at a very young age how much work it is. Like I'll go out with my kids and, we'll take out 3 trees and fix one little rock, and it'll take half a day.
Yeah.
And for a 5 and 7-year-old to understand, like, this is what it takes to maintain a mountain bike trail, they then can appreciate what we have. Because we have 250 trails here in Squamish that are on trail forks.
Yes.
And the resources that it takes to maintain those trails, build those trails, manage those trails is just crazy. And I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Definitely, yeah. It's easy to take for granted. You just show off in your truck, ride half marathon, whatever, but you don't realize the thousands of the tens of thousands of hours.
That's right.
That have gone into that. Yeah.
So the one plug I wanted to make while we're talking about this is, number one, buy a membership.
Absolutely.
Wherever you are. Whatever place that you ride, support them. The membership is really important because it allows that organization to report back to local government and let them know how many engaged users they have.
Yeah.
So a second my kids were born, they got Circle memberships. It doesn't cost me very much more, but now instead of 2 people, my wife and I, there's now 4 members.
Yes.
So if everyone did that, Circle will be able to go to the Squamish government and say, we have this many users, this percentage of the community is engaged, increase our funding. And it works like that. And if you're not riding in one area, you go to ride a different area, make a small donation. So Trail Forks has this really amazing tool called Trail Karma. And I've tested it. I can 100% speak for this fact. All of the money that you donate goes to that organization. So if you think about a day skiing, right? You buy a lift ticket for every day you go skiing, or you have a season's pass for that area. So why isn't biking the same? Why aren't we making a small donation every time that we ride?
Yeah.
So, when I ride on the North Shore, probably 20 or 30 days a year. Every time I just make a small donation, $2, $3, $5, but it adds up over the year.
Yeah, and I love that comparison, like skiing towards biking.
That's right.
We're not necessarily trying to make it like you have to spend $100 every time you go biking, like you do when you go skiing. It's $5, $10. It goes a long way.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you travel to a community, it helps them track the data, how many people are riding here, and showing how many people care about those trails.
Yeah.
I rode in this super small town in northern BC called Clearwater, and there was this really sick trail that was just showed up out of nowhere. And I was like, this is amazing. This trail is so fun. So I donated $50.
Fantastic.
Because I was like, this is sick. And, sometimes if I don't have the best ride, I might donate a little bit less, but I'm making that donation every time.
Fantastic.
And, less than the beer that I'm drinking at the end of the ride.
Yeah.
It's a really small thing, but it makes a massive difference.
Money well spent.
Yeah.
For sure. For anyone wanting to go and get a Sorka membership or make a trail donation, if you're visiting, we'll put a link in the show notes to make it nice and easy. But I love that you mentioned that Trail Forks feature as well. It kind of takes away, again, another barrier.
That's right.
You're already looking at Trail Forks to figure out where to go. It's pretty easy to make that donation at the same time.
Yeah. Through the organizations that I've worked for, we looked at a whole bunch of different donation options.
Right.
And Trail Karma is actually the best option.
Okay.
So a lot of trail associations are using a tap thing,
right,
which is super cool. You show up at the trailhead and you can tap your phone and make a donation. But that system costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
I think that one of them I was looking at costs $30 a month just to administer it.
Yeah, the payment processor takes their cut, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So this is the one thing that Trail Forks has really done right, that Pink Bike has done right, is that Trail Karma, 100% of the money that you donate goes to that trail organization.
Yeah, fantastic. That's some really good knowledge there from your research. I love getting that on the podcast as well and spreading the good word. We're going to start winding things down here a little bit, but I've got one more kind of deep question for you, and that's, who do you look up to in the mountain biking world and why?
The honest answer is whoever's having the most fun. You know, I started off by talking about how, for me, mountain biking is not tied to any dollars, any economic situation. So it's truly doing the sport for the right reason. You know, like I am a certified mountain bike coach and guide, but I don't want to work in that industry. I did that for personal development because I want to truly enjoy what I'm doing without muddying that water at all. And like absolutely zero judgment on somebody that's like working and building a business in the industry.
Yeah, but I can understand that as well. Some days I have days off and I don't want to ride my mountain bike.
That's
so
right.
I've just spent the last 12 on my mountain bike.
Yeah, and this is what I found through other sports that I was passionate about and also working in, is sometimes it took away my stoke of that sport. So what I am so fired up about is anybody that's having a good time. And you know, whether that's looking at my kids and them like having that shit-eating grin on their face after they rode a trail for the first time, and I'm like, this is the greatest. That gets me more stoked than me riding something that like is rad for me. And those that are also like helping bring people along. You know, my favorite thing ever is to be on the side of the trail changing a flat tire and someone be like, hey man, you all good?
Yeah.
Like that just makes me feel like we're part of a community. And you know, as mountain biking grows, I worry that we'll lose that sense of community. So I encourage everyone to just like check in on each other. How you doing? Like, do you need anything? Can I offer you a tube? And like every single time that I've like been like, hey man, do you need a tube? And like giving them my only tube, it always comes back to me one way or another.
100%.
Like the next day I'll flat and there'll be somebody that helps me out, or someone's like, hey, can I buy you a beer? Or here's a bunch of beers from my car. Like every time.
Exactly. And even just meeting riding buddies. I've met some of my best riding buddies over the years from just like sparking up a conversation about,
That's right.
yeah, a breakdown or something completely random. And then it's like, oh, you go ride the next part of the trail together. And before you know it, you get a new friend.
And you know, the same thing, like when you see somebody with their phone and they're looking like they're confused, help them find the right trail.
Totally.
Because otherwise they're going to be the person that's climbing up one of your down trails and gets in the way. And there's an incident and it creates this whole thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, like offer them that support. Take that 2 minutes and be like, do you know where you're going? Can I help you? And they're like, oh, I don't know what to ride. Check out this trail. It's really sick.
Yeah.
And you're going to make their day better and everyone's day is going to be better.
Totally. Yeah. You're going to feel better for it as well.
That's right.
Yeah. Dude, words of wisdom there. Wanted to give you the opportunity here. Is there anything you wanted to mention, media, anything like that?
No, I just want to say thank you to you for like making an active effort to give back to the community. Because I do really want this sense of community to continue. And, you know, this is one of the reasons why I'm so fired up about Circle is they try to build that community. And mountain biking can be a pretty scary, isolating thing. So as we all collectively work to build that community, share tips, tools, whatever it is, that's what makes the community grow. That's what makes the sport exist and just be better. So thank you,
man. Yeah, I echo that right back at you. Thank you for all the great work you're doing in the community. Then we've talked about so many different things over this conversation, over at Ride Today, such great times. If there was one thing that you'd send listeners away to think about on their next ride, what would it be?
Yeah, it's this idea of flow state. So doing whatever you need to do to try to get into that flow state, because once you unlock that potential, it is a complete game changer.
Totally.
You know, everyone has stressful lives. Whether you're like me and you have 2 kids and 3 jobs, or you have 1 job and no kids, your life is stressful, right? We live in a crazy time where there's so much technology, it never stops. Find a way to like find your happy place, and that like Happy Gilmore piece where like, you know, he thinks about his grandma and it's like everything just disappears. That's the flow state. And if you can find a way to unlock that potential, whether it's through biking or through something else in your life, I guarantee you your life will change for the better forever.
Yeah, such wise words, man. I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for coming and being part of this Pilling Ride with me today. Had an absolute blast, and I'm sure people will get a lot out of this as well. Let's do it again soon.
Thank you.
Cheers. What's up, guys? Just one more thing before you hit the trails. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and don't be a stranger. I'd love to hear from you about any topics or any particular episodes that you enjoyed, and even about any guests that you'd like to hear me have on the show in the future. You can find me on Instagram at _the_mind_mountain. This podcast, mountain biking, and mindset are all things that are very close to my heart, so I feel super grateful to be able to share these conversations with you. So much love to you all for taking the time to listen. I'll see you next time.